Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to...
Europe's least capitalist capital.
What is that?
Berlin's Potsdamer Platz. This place was supposed to transform the city into a
She already said.
Wait, I didn't hear her. What she
Berlin.
said? Berlin.
business metropolis. Today, it's known for
Now, what it means, least capitalist capital?
There's nothing there?
Yeah? I would guess like all the capitalist activities is in other cities, not in Berlin.
being-
Because maybe like they don't have like I don't know if the government meet there or if they say...
I don't know.
empty. Capital cities are usually economic driving forces. But Berlin stands out. Have a look at this. If you take Sofia out of Bulgaria, the country's GDP per capita would shrink.
Oh.
I guess like in Europe, yeah, but here in the States, not really. The capital city is just the politics. Like that's it.
Oh yeah, that's
Like
where
it
they meet.
really, aside from that, Washington D.C. has no. I think you take D.C. out of America's economy, 1% decrease in, I don't know. I don't think it's that, but yeah, here we definitely see that in Europe is different.
By almost 30%. Take Paris out of France, and its GDP would dip 15%. But let's have a look at Berlin.
The capital of France is Paris?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking of the heart of France. Never mind.
Berlin out of Germany, and its GDP essentially wouldn't change. But
Wow,
why?
that's crazy. Wouldn't change the same.
Part of it, as you might have guessed, is its history. But there is more to it. Berlin has a complicated relationship with capitalism. In this episode, we will take a look at the unorthodox economics of Berlin through the eyes of its residents.
The idea to live in a communal household with 20 people, it was kind of like a utopian fantasy.
It was actually the tourists who saved the city from its bankruptcy.
The street currency of Berlin is changing a little bit from inspiration to more, financial terms, to more what can you afford to do.
That's all coming up on Business Beyond. Let's start here, a former war bunker in the middle of Berlin. Much like this bunker, the story of Berlin's modern economy is one of transformation. And it's the story of treading a tightrope between capitalism and counterculture. During the Second World War, 4,000 people were seeking shelter in this bunker. Then the East German government used it as a storage for fruits from its ally Cuba. In the 90s, ravers turned the bunker into one of the world's most hardcore techno clubs. Then
That's
it was
so
abandoned.
interesting, the transformation.
In 2003, Karen Boros and her husband bought the bunker and turned it into a private art museum.
It's quite incredible to be able to buy a bunker. In the beginning, we thought, the history is, of course, very dark and tragic, but
I don't know, but listen, if some shit goes down, it's a good dual
Holding
usage.
space,
yeah, it's like, oh, you have it for art, but guess what? Shit going down, oh, we staying.
at the same time, this building, was looking for transformation.
To understand Berlin's economics today, we have to look at its history. Berlin wasn't always broke. In 1920, it was booming. It was the world's third largest city after New York and London, and one of Europe's most modern metropoles. People were flocking to Berlin for work. German industry giants like Siemens, AEG, and Borsig were all founded here. But after the Second World War, Allied powers divided Germany.
But I do wonder then, what is the Germany's economic center, if not Berlin? Which city has the most impact on GDP?
Germany into two countries.
Could
And that
be, yeah,
split
I don't
cut
know.
straight through Berlin. One part became the new capital of Soviet-controlled East Germany, the other remained in the democratic West. Starting in 1961, the East German authorities began building a border wall, eventually stretching 155 kilometers.
Many West Berlin companies decided to leave the city because it was just not secure. It was actually the moment that major companies like Siemens decided to go to Bavaria.
Berlin lost its economic might. Banks settled in Frankfurt, industry in southern Germany, and publishing houses in Hamburg.
So half of the
Oh,
households
so maybe none of the cities is like well distributed. Oh, interesting.
of West Berlin was actually subsidies from West Germany. In East Berlin, we had the capital of East Germany, which was economically bankrupt.
Then, in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down, and the city was one again.
What a time. The bottle cap eyeglasses. Huge.
1990 was the beginning of a tumultuous decade for Berlin. The city had to find a new identity and an economic footing.
There were expectations that Berlin would get an enormous influence in Europe at that time. There were expectations that the city would attract millions of people to come to the city. Some people thought Berlin would reach 4 million inhabitants, 5 million inhabitants, maybe even 6 million within 10 years or so.
To become one, the city had to unite the centrally planned economy of the East with the market economy of the West.
The West German currency, the D-Mark, the famous D-Mark, was introduced in East Germany in 1990, in July 1990. People couldn't wait for this. Actually, people were lining up at the banks once they could do their exchange.
But Berlin was struggling. The outdated communist-style factories in the east of the city couldn't compete in a global economy and had to close. Unemployment soared and people left Berlin. Abandoned apartment buildings and empty factories suggested a wasteland to some, to others, a blank canvas.
So the atmosphere was anything is possible, and we can turn the world upside down.
Sandy Kaltenborn came to Berlin in 1990, drawn in by the city's cheap housing and alternative ideas. He settled in the East Berlin district of Friedrichshain.
That's interesting because we hear like in East Germany, there's not much opportunities there to just go to East Germany.
I think there is not much opportunity if you're looking for a job. But if you have money already, it's a lot of opportunities to buy low and renovate and do stuff like that. Start a business.
Yeah, but not much progress has been made. Like it's still like the same. Like everyone still goes over to the west.
I think it's improving, maybe not like a super fast pace, but I still think it's improving.
We had a huge squatting movement. At this time, there were about 120 squats in mainly East Berlin because, it was a historical gap. The West German authorities were not in charge yet, and the East German authorities had different problems. So in this gap, a squatting movement emerged. The idea to live in a communal household with 20 people, it was kind of like an utopian fantasy.
In the 1990s, Berlin became a capital of counterculture. And techno, its soundtrack. Artists, activists, and music pioneers captured Berlin's abandoned buildings. Ruins of a department store became the famous art center Tacheles. And remember the bunker? It became the forerunner to the now world-famous techno club Berghain.
There was a techno club and there was a sadomaso club, and all these different levels were, during party nights, it was connecting.
Berlin's Love Parade started as a small techno street demonstration for peace and ballooned into a world-renowned parade.
Have you heard of this before or
No.
I mean, at that time in the early 90s, I would mainly move in these alternative networks, which mean that our food would come from collectives. They would we have collaborations with farmers on the countryside. They would bring their food boxes in. I mentioned the cultural venues we had, and they were collectively run. So it was a network where you can survive with very little money. And it's not really about the money. It's about the resources if you don't have to spend so much money, right? So it's really, if you don't have to pay 1,000 euros for rent or more, this gives you a lot of freedom in your daily life. And that was kind of like the vision.
But this wasn't the only future vision of Berlin at the time. While some pushed Berlin's counterculture, others wanted to bring back the financial power of pre-war Berlin.
So many politicians thought that Berlin would catch up with the industrial and financial power of the pre-war period before 1933, before 1945.
Instead of abandoned apartments, this vision centered around Berlin's Potsdamer Platz. Exactly, this place. During Germany's division, it was a desolate border area between East and West Berlin. After the fall of the wall, Daimler-Benz, the forerunner of the Mercedes-Benz Group, bought the plaza. With the goal of creating a 21st century high-rise city, Potsdamer Platz transformed into Europe's biggest construction site. One staunch defender of that goal was the city's mayor, Eberhard Diepgen.
Eberhard Diepgen belonged to these politicians who had high expectations and who thought that major companies, major industrial companies and also major financial players like big banks would
He almost
return
sound like
to
Arnold.
Berlin.
But
The guy? Well, you know, Arnold's accent is German accent, so yeah.
those expectations didn't become true. The only major German company that set up shop at Potsdamer Platz was Germany's public railway, Deutsche Bahn. Other firms steered clear. The city still couldn't compete with German business hubs like Frankfurt or Munich. Berlin's biggest businesses were its hospitals and public transport, all state-owned. Its failing ambitions cost the city. Berlin was spending more money than it was taking in. And the financial hole it dug itself into was getting deeper. Berlin's city-run bank was embroiled in a scandal. Check out this DW report from 2000.
It appears that loans for shady property deals were common practice. The bank's managing director throughout was Klaus Landowski, who, until recently, was leader of the CDU group in the Berlin parliament and a close political ally of the mayor. But those ties between local politicians and business interests in Berlin appear to have spun a web of corruption from which it's difficult to escape.
A web of corruption that
I feel like back then corruption was everywhere though. Like in the late 90s, early 2000s, like in Eastern Europe, corruption was just everywhere.
ended up causing the downfall of Berlin's city government. By the beginning of the 2000s, Berlin's vision of becoming a global business hub seemed like a fever dream. Unemployment in Berlin
No,
was
they catched it.
The corruption?
Yeah.
Oh. I don't know how they but I feel like with corruption, everything started to change like in late 2000s, around 07, 08, like that time. Kind of people started looking down towards corruption and not just like, oh, that's just what it is, at least in Lithuania.
soaring. No other place in Germany had more people relying on welfare. Berlin was lacking business. So instead, it began capitalizing on what it did have to offer. It was cool. In 2003, Berlin's new mayor, Klaus Wowereit, coined the city's slogan. He declared Berlin poor, but sexy.
We were laughing about the slogan when he put it out in the first time, but I think it was very visionary of Mr. Wowereit to understand that this poorness or the low cost and low income has an economic potential, right? It's very attractive.
In 2004, the first low-cost flights landed at the city's airport, paving the way to an unconventional capital. Berlin's former industrial parks had turned into adult playgrounds, and the landing strip of an abandoned airport into whatever this is. Berlin was the only city worldwide with 3 opera houses, and state subsidies helped keep ticket prices cheap. Between 1996 and 2006, the number of visitors in Berlin more than doubled. By 2012, it tripled.
It was actually the tourists who saved the city from...
That's interesting. I wouldn't think of Berlin as like a tourist attraction. Like, no more tourist attraction than like Warsaw, for example, which is...
Really, I would think Berlin would be a tourist attraction.
Why? What do you, like, from your perspective, what do you see? Like, what's in Berlin that you want to see that, ooh, I want to see that?
I'm thinking back, just hearing like my perspective of hearing Berlin. Like, honestly, is hearing the name sounds cool.
Oh, I would say one thing, I guess the Berlin Wall. Like that's a unique.
Yeah,
If
I
you
guess
if
the
you're
visit-
if you're in a history, if you're like a history buff, I do see like, okay, seeing a Berlin Wall, that's an attraction. Yeah. But aside from that, I don't.
You also hear it in movies too. Going to Berlin or Berlin this.
Well,
Out of all the German countries, German cities, I feel like Berlin is one of the popular ones, just by name recognition.
Yeah, 'cause it's a capital, but like in terms of destinations, like for example, you know, like in Paris, the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, like all these destinations. Like in Berlin, I don't like the wall. Yes, the wall. I agree that is interesting to see, but aside from that, nothing like comes to what opera houses because they have 3 of them. I mean, if you like opera, I guess techno scene. I guess maybe people into techno. Yeah.
its bankruptcy. When these tourists came
Where
to
do they
Berlin,
host,
they
like,
noticed an interesting
Oktoberfest?
I think that's Munich. I don't know, but it's not Berlin though.
city with many
Let
clubs,
me
many
see.
museums, with low alcohol prices, with this like, sense of liberty, also sexual liberty, which also attracted many people to come and maybe also to live in Berlin.
Can Bulak was one of the people drawn in by Berlin's cool.
Yeah, Oktoberfest is primarily held in Munich. Yeah. Right, so when you think of Munich, okay, in October you want to visit Munich.
He moved to Berlin wanting to play in techno clubs. Now he's working as a composer and pianist, mixing the electronic sounds of Berlin with classical music.
Living in Berlin as an artist is looking forward, having a vector that is progressing
from?
always.
I don't know.
When Kahn came to Berlin, he encountered a city unlike any other.
There, the main currency is how inspiring are you? Are you an inspiring person to have at the table? Are you bringing passion to the table? That's key in Berlin, that you can radiate a certain inspiration, and that will open you more doors than just having a certain wealth.
In the 2000s, the city was still full of buildings that had remained abandoned and underdeveloped since the fall of the Berlin Wall.
It's the main reason why art can flourish in a progressive manner. You don't have to create art that has to be in the space that's already existing, which is probably the living room of someone who's financing the art. You can just go and put it into some rough space.
Berlin's rough spaces brought inspiration to the city, and eventually they also delivered the long-awaited investment boom. After the financial crisis, investors escaping bad loans in the United States were looking for new opportunities and found Berlin's cheap real estate.
Berlin was considered to be as a city where there was a huge gap
Okay, yeah, it does sound like Arnold.
between the rents
Because now, like, I'm listening, I'm like, okay, I'm hearing Arnold.
that people also paid and what you could actually demand for such apartments in other cities.
The city's facade was transforming, but as money was finally pouring in, it was pushing out those communities that shaped Berlin's brand. In 2012, artists were evicted from Tacheles. That's the department store that turned into a squat that turned into an art center. The building was bought by a New York investment firm. The former squatting central of Friedrichshain got a facelift.
We saw this.
Yes, we saw this in the music video.
Yes.
And Berlin's rents started a steep ascent that's still ongoing today.
Around
Look
2010,
at that jump from 2022.
Ascent
2022, because like it was kind of growing, and 2022 to 2020 it jumped. Wow.
that's still ongoing today.
around 2010, this was a tipping point where gentrification actually hit the middle class. But in 2011, we received a double rent increase in social housing where we live. It's very sad. Because it also means you'll have different people coming in the city.
Sandy Kaltenborn and his neighbors started a tenant community and managed to temporarily halt rent increases in Berlin's social housing. But they were up against an overwhelming trend. A city that once was known for its cheap housing is turning unaffordable. In 2017, Berlin had the fastest rising property prices of all cities in the world.
Wow, the whole world, huh?
And the crisis is also hitting Berlin's techno heart. Last year, two of the city's most famous clubs announced they are closing. Their leases weren't renewed. According to the Berlin Clubbing Association, half of all clubs are considering shutting their doors because of rising costs from rents and inflation.
There's something of the soul is being lost in these days, or if you want, so being sold to a market interest.
But the 2010
place.
I don't know. What can you put in for a club?
One put an art show.
I guess, but art show, is that like more profitable than the club? I don't know.
also created new opportunities. While rents were rising, so was Berlin's GDP. Starting in 2014, its growth was outpacing the national average. By 2018, it was triple that of Germany.
But so if it's outpacing, then how come you remove Berlin and you still get no change in GDP, basically, not even 1%? Confused by that.
We're no longer all running around in flip-flops and, and broken jeans and living in houses that don't have good plumbing.
Kati Ernst co-founded Germany's first company to produce period underwear in 2018. At the time, she was part of a growing trend. Berlin was turning into Germany's startup hub.
I'm absolutely convinced that if I had lived somewhere else, because I lived in Berlin prior to finding the company, this company wouldn't exist. There was so many things that made it possible from here. Besides the network, there were startup prizes that we won where we got cash or recognition from the town because it fosters this kind of thing. It was fairly cheap to rent an office space at the beginning. So there were so many things that made it a fantastic place to found our company.
Today, more startups are founded in Berlin than in any other German city. Businesses like Zalando, HelloFresh, and Delivery Hero were born here and grew into international companies.
The city wasn't really shaped by business. It was very much shaped by politics, by art, and that kind of thing.
HelloFresh is now it's not Amazon.
No, I think it's still called HelloFresh.
It's called HelloFresh.
So.
But surely, because the startups that are here are growing so much, it's becoming more of a business hub.
More than 3 decades after the fall of the wall, it seems fair to say that Berlin is no longer a city in flux between capitalism and counterculture. Its cheap real estate and reputation have become its economic engines. But where does that leave Berlin for the coming decade? Despite its new growth, Berlin's mountain of municipal debt still stands. And remember this from the beginning? Berlin's economic might is still relatively meager. Also because it's competing with Germany's many other economic centers. This year, the city's conservative government slashed Berlin's culture funding to save money. Some of Kahn's performances were cancelled because of the cuts.
The street currency of Berlin is changing a little bit from inspiration to more, financial terms, to more what can you afford to do.
The techno club where Kahn started his career is among those who will be closing. He worries that Berlin is losing what made it exceptional.
But that's like most of the major cities, like anywhere in the world, is like, oh, lose, because just people don't want change, and with change comes like that losing, because but change is not always a bad, and you have to change. You can't always just stay the same, because then the world is gonna surpass you.
If Berlin is not poor anymore, can it still be sexy? I'm pretty sure that's the challenge of our decade.
A look at Berlin's economic history provides a lot of answers on the city Berlin is today. But one question remains: what direction is Berlin headed in? That's the
Interesting video. Very eye-opening.
It's interesting title that they put to it.
Least capitalist capital. Well, to be fair, the word capitalist, I think it comes from capital. So, nice wordplay.
Guys, of course, let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord. And as always, share as much kindness as possible.